fact, engraved on it is what I just said, the 2009 Eugene Katz Award for Excellence in the Coverage of Immigration. There you go, and there's a check that comes with that, too. Thank you. There you go. Thank you. Thank you very much. When I started to do these stories, San Francisco is a different kind of place. And it turns out it had its own foreign policy, as many of you know, and part of its foreign policy that it wasn't part of the United States of America. In that, if a kid was caught committing an offense or allegedly committing an offense, they would decide that they weren't, even though they knew he wasn't here illegally, or he was here illegally or wasn't here legally. It was amazing that they filled out the form, and a lot of these kids were from Honduras for some strange reason. I mean, why they wound up there, apparently somebody got the word that it was okay to come here and nothing was going to happen. So when they filled out their form, they always said, 14 Unknown Street, Honduras. Or else they gave an address in Oakland, which turned out to be a house where a lot of them all lived, and they all claimed to have relatives. Sometimes they're the same people. And matter of fact, one guy, see, one of the things is the probation officers who are supposed to be the people who are trying to rehabilitate these folks, they would call. And in one case, one uncle answered, and he said, "Hi. Oh, yeah, I remember him. Yeah, I'm his uncle. But I don't know anything about him." And then they called back an hour or 2 hours later, and they got another guy who said, yeah, I'm his uncle too. And so what happened was, why this story ended up happening is that a lot of people became frustrated over a lot of years, and it turned out that they had this policy dates back to the 1990s, and no one was going to, in San Francisco, it's not like something you want to raise attention to, that they had basically made this sort of an agreement amongst themselves that they weren't going to report youths caught committing offenses to the ICE folks, or before it was the INS. And so one of the things that happened after the story started running is they said, hey, wait a minute, we had this agreement. We really did. We talked to these guys back in 1996, and they basically agreed that this was okay, that we don't have to turn these folks over to ICE. We can just basically treat them as if they're U.S. citizens. And if they commit offenses, they'll be entitled to the same treatment as folks that are here legally. The trouble was with that whole premise is that the people that came here from Honduras, they had no relatives here. They had no one. They were basically brought here, they called unaccompanied minors. And there was no one minding the store. If they were youths, there was no one supervising them. They had no one to turn them over to. So they had to keep them locked up, because they had no place to, they knew that the putative relatives weren't their relatives. So they kept them in juvenile hall, and they were there day after day, waiting for something to happen, and finally they would plead guilty, or the equivalent thereof in the juvenile system, and then they had to figure out, well, what do we do with them? That's when they hit upon the idea of flying them back to their native country. Now, it wasn't a matter of deporting them, because they didn't want to report them to ICE. So they had to use probation officers as basically escorts. So they put them on planes, and they would go as far as Texas or Florida, and then they would go back to Honduras, or the original country that they were from. Then they'd come right back. Or if they didn't come back, there was no supervision of them, so no one knows what ended up happening. But when they did come back, it became this horrible frustration for folks. So one of the reasons that generated this story was that people just didn't understand how this could keep going, and how this system could keep going on for so long. And there were people that were trying to call attention to it, and they would go to the judges or the commissioners in the youth system, and they'd say, how can you do this? This is illegal. We have to report these folks to ICE. And they'd say, you do that, you'll be in big trouble. And they didn't. And but they were so frustrated by it, they ended up coming to me. So that tells you how truly frustrated these folks are. It took more than a decade, involving, I don't know how, one kid, the story goes, one probation officer turned him over, and they found out about it. So not only did they get the probation officer in trouble, they spent tens of thousands of dollars to get the kid back. nobody knows how much because none of this information is public. I don't know who this kid is to this day, but I have been told that they spent that guy got in a lot of trouble. He ended up quitting, and they ended up got a lot of lawyers' fees paying to get the kid back from which country, I don't remember if it was Honduras or El Salvador. But anyway, they finally got him back. But that was part of the lore of this thing because it's not exactly they keep records. And the other thing is that because these kids are mostly juvenile offenders in the system, we couldn't go to court. We didn't have any. I had to rely on people who were prepared to break the law. Although sending them back without reporting to ICE theoretically was also breaking the law. But anyway, the people would be able to give me their records, so we could see how many times that Mr. Ramos, who was is now charged with killing 3 family members of the Bologna family, he had benefited not once but twice. And matter of fact, I subsequently heard that he was Youth of the Year as part of one of the programs that were designed to assist. And there was a whole entire network of people that were relying on this not deporting these kids because they had to be housed. They had no supervision, no adult supervision. So they created this whole thing where they learned, they got cultural training. I'm not quite sure what that was, but they housing, medical care. Probation officers had to take them to medical appointments. I mean, and so you had a whole. On the other hand, I could talk about this for a little longer than I should. On the other hand, you had this entire group of folks who came storming to my newspaper, who traditionally held sway when it came to issues like this involving journals. See, I'm not part of that. I cover crime. See, I got nothing to do with that. They don't know me. They're mad at me. They don't know who to talk to. They're all their friends. They pick up the phone and go, "Hey, why are you guys writing all these stories? Can't you stop this? I mean, I'm serious. We want to meet with you. We really do." And I said, "Well, you can meet with me, but I understand your point of view that a lot of these kids are exploited. They're brought here by drug cartels who take advantage of the fact that San Francisco is a sanctuary for Honduran drug dealers. It's okay. I mean, I understand that these kids are exploited, and as one activist said in a meeting, these kids just want to make money. And this is the best way." And I was like, okay, I can't do that if I'm an American citizen coming to court and say, I robbed the bank because I just wanted to make money. I'm just floored. I mean, it just, but, and everybody sits there and they go, yeah. And I'm like, this is not the world that I'm used to. I cover crime in courts. And unfortunately, there is one negative element to this in the sense that these folks have a point that under the federal immigration rules, it doesn't matter whether Junior committed the offense or not. He's back. He's gone. So if for some reason somebody gets caught wrongly accused of a crime, and that does happen, they get deported anyway. And so, but the vast majority, I would say, admit the offense very quickly because they get freed. They were freed when they committed the offense. If they just said, yeah, I did it, they would go back to their little this little house they had, this phony house in Oakland where they could live and make a lot of money. And when they sent them down, they sent them all the way down to San Bernardino County, which is all the way down to the bottom of the state almost. A long way from San Francisco, over 500 miles, I think. In any event, they come right back. They'd be back in a week. Because there's no way to make money in San Bernardino. They could make a lot of money in San Francisco. Anyway, so that's what this story was. And what I think the interesting thing is that, in a sense, I agree with Deborah Saunders because I don't think that immigration reporters were going to cover this story. It just wasn't something that because they have to presuppose that people here are here because they're exploited and they're here to seek a better life. And I don't have a problem with that. I mean, people come here for all sorts of reasons, but my view as a crime reporter, my bias is that typically if you're responsible for a crime, the idea of the system is that you should be held responsible for it. In any event.